Andy, before we get into it, I just wanted to mention that I got a text yesterday from my mother,
Yes.
who was very excited because she was getting her nails done. She was in the nail salon. That was, well, I'm sure that was exciting to her. But the main reason she texted me that she was excited was because she saw your name on the TV screen across the salon.
First of all, great eyesight, great powers of observation.
She's doing great. She's really doing great.
Yeah, and we have many friends in the business. I don't know that I would go, oh. So yeah.
Well, you know, she knows who matters ultimately.
Right.
And
assuming it must have been Goldberg's.
Yeah,
right?
I would assume so as well.
Unless she was watching an Argentinian channel that was playing Love Incorporated.
Right. But she was, and then she got very confused because she was like, but it said he was some kind of producer or something. And so I had to go through a whole explanation of WGA credits and
Sure.
how that matters to how much money you make. And she's like, how much money are you making? And I was like, can we not get into that right now?
Sure.
It was a whole thing. Hey everybody, welcome to Co-Pilots. I am Sean Conroy.
And I'm Andy Secunda.
On this podcast, we talk about TV pilots, the first episodes of television shows. Sometimes pilots become long-running series. Others don't make it past that first episode.
We're going to talk about all of them. The great pilots, the bad pilots, the weird pilots, the forgotten pilots. We are TV writers, but it should be noted that we are the dumbest TV writers you know, so all of these are just our dumb opinions.
So dumb. So this week we watched Severance.
Yes, and I suggested this, I think probably more often, because Sean is someone who devours television more than I do, and he has just sparkling recommendations from my perspective.
I like how you bring that up every week. Like, I really enjoy that.
I you gave me the wire,
yeah.
so I will never, stop being grateful for that.
I think one thing we should do is have, like, me give a recommendation at the end of every show, but do it in a way where I'm actually recommending something that's not good. Just to defeat your
You just don't want to be put in a box of having good taste.
Look, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's bad.
But yeah, mostly I wanted Sean's take on this and see how he reacted to it on Severance, because I'd seen the whole first season and he had not seen any of it. So sometimes it'll be one of us, sometimes it'll be the other, and sometimes we'll both or neither have seen the series, just the pilot.
Well, that's what they call 4 quadrants we're hitting.
Yeah, so that way we're covering all levels of people who are equally disinterested in this show, this podcast. So yeah, I mean, we're operating blind. We haven't really even talked before we started recording.
No.
And as is the real inception point for this show, that was the reason we kind of thought, maybe we should do this as a podcast, is that I'm always eager to discuss it with Sean, whatever it is we're watching together.
Just a couple things before we start talking about the actual show. I know you have some information you wanted to share about.
Very little.
I will say that it debuted on February 18th, 2022. And that was a big day because, of course, that was the day that Season 5 of Stranger Things was announced. Everybody was very excited about that.
The town was a titter.
Yes. And also that was Dr. Dre's birthday, was February 18th.
Two things. How are you celebrating, Sean?
His birthday?
Yeah.
This year I'm going to do something with Ivory. It's the Ivory birthday. So this is an interesting story. Well, we don't really have a lot of details, but that this started as a screenplay and then became...
Yeah, Dan Erickson had no time in a writing room and had written this script, and it seems as a screenplay, and had gotten on the Blood List in 2016.
Which is
sort of a thriller horror version of the Blacklist, which is you can explain that.
I don't know what it is.
All right, well, it's a sort of a mostly entertainment industry driven list of the best screenplays. My understanding is it's mostly like, sort of insiders, assistants, people who are the people who most read the scripts, all sort of voting, and the scripts that get on there get instantly a lot of attention.
So it's like stuff that hasn't been produced, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah. So people read a lot of stuff and pass it up the chain, and then there's stuff that doesn't get passed up that they go, this is actually really good. Somebody should know about it.
I would actually love to know more about the process. Once again, call the tip line.
That's 1-800-SEAN and Andy. Or was it Andy and Sean? I think we have 2 tip lines.
We have 2 tip lines, so you can call either one. And somehow, I guess, through that process, it wove it weaved. It ended up at Ben
Wended.
Stiller's
It
company.
wended its way.
Right. Red Hour Entertainment winded. And Ben Stiller got involved. And, if you got a heavy hitter like that involved, then you're sort of halfway there. Although my understanding, this is more, people who are distantly know the players involved. And I think it's also public knowledge on Dan Ericsson's, description of Ben Stiller, which is generally, not generally, it was universally positive, as well it should be. He created his career. It's just that he's very meticulous, Ben Stiller is, and, would go over it line by line and, question all the angles on it and like really, I mean, that's why I think it's to a certain degree, it's, people are astonished this is Dan Ericsson's first script, and I would love to get a hold of that original script and compare, because it seems so incredibly, adept and well structured now.
Maybe Stiller could have been a little more particular with The Secret Life of Walter Mitty.
Well, I mean, that was also Dan Ericsson's script, and I think that was why he was so hard on him.
He did the rewrite of the Danny Kaye original.
That was on the Chuckle list.
Yes. Which is a
thing that a bunch of clowns vote on, and in the industry,
party clowns,
yes,
not circus clowns
around Hollywood.
Yeah,
and
so Ericsson gets this career out of Ben Stiller.
Yes,
has this show. We all go, wow, this is amazingly accomplished for somebody who's doing this for the first time.
Right. We, not including Sean, who has just watched it recently.
Right. I didn't think anything until this week, and that's not what I didn't think about that.
No, you were thinking about yourself.
I was. Yeah. I was not paying attention to the show.
Yeah.
Anything else before we get started?
Nothing that's I know.
Okay.
As a dumb person.
Okay. So let's talk through the pilot and figure out what goes on. So we start in a conference room, sort of a nondescript conference room, where a woman is passed out on the table, and there's a voice on a speaker waking her up, and it's very disconcerting and strange, and we don't understand exactly what's going on, nor does she. We, as the viewer, are sort of in the same state that she is, trying to figure out what's happening. She can't get out of the room. She's trying to get out of the room. The voice on the speaker says, I just want you to take 5 questions, this survey. She doesn't want to do that. She's resistant. She doesn't know where she is. She's a little bit panicked, maybe I would say.
Sure. Agitated, angry, panicked.
Right. And she finally realizes she has no choice but to answer these questions. Or no, I guess she doesn't realize she has no choice. He asks the first question, and she realizes she doesn't know the answer and how bizarre that is.
Right. The first question being, who are you?
Yeah.
What's your name?
What's your name? Whatever it is.
So she says, the first line of the show is, who are you? Which is, I don't know when to get into this, because to me, watching the show originally, I love dystopian stuff. I'm a longstanding fan of Ben Stiller. I had a few.
So this was like a Venn diagram
him.
of some of your favorite things.
Exactly. And just from way back, Ben Stiller show, maybe even before, some of his shorts that he did, like The Hustler Money, we did a parody of, his classic Tom Cruise. But he does there's a level of parody that he did of genre stuff and of, mainstream media that I think to a certain degree has been unparalleled in terms of just, it was obviously very silly as appropriate to the time, but just a level of detail that very few people have kind of matched over time. And as he's gone through his career, some things, it's obviously all over the place, but he's recently got into drama, and sort of that same meticulousness has been applied to drama. And I kind of feel like this is, interestingly, kind of almost a mixture of this like heavily satirical eye and this dramatic kind of weight being combined. And what's amazing to me is from the beginning, like literally first line, it states the theme. Who are you? Mm-hmm. First minute, the visuals, the aesthetic especially, just immediately draws you in with the mystery and the tone. And it's the thing that, all screenwriters and directors are always they're always trying to, hook you in the first moment of a pilot, which is why they usually lean on in directions of like, well, let's everyone
Action.
explain who they are immediately or sex or whatever it is. And this is just,
I always try to explain who I am during sex, which might be...
Well, I mean, that probably makes them ask less questions. So.
Let me tell you about where I was born and the things I've done since then.
I mean, many people would, in this industry would say, well, then your sex is going to test better with audiences.
Right. The dial goes up.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't know at what point to ask you this, Sean. Should I ask an overview? Because I don't know what... Like, did you enjoy this pilot? What was your
That's
take?
a good question. Yes, and I think this is the appropriate time to ask that because it is it's like an interesting show in that way where you do kind of come away with an overall idea versus maybe the moments to moments of the show being because I felt like it was interesting and I would like to watch more of the show. I don't know that it's a show that I would walk away from going, that was amazing. I loved it. You know? It was compelling. It was fascinating. It's interesting you say that about the satirical elements because I wasn't thinking of it as satire, but I was more like, oh, it's one of these kind of things,
And when you say these kind of things, like liken it to something.
I couldn't even tell you. I couldn't even give you a good example.
Well, let me throw out something to you and see if this does fit your thing. Because this show, from my perspective, it's mystery box storytelling. Have we discussed this before?
No.
So, mystery box.
Or have we?
That's for you to decide, audience. It's a term that I believe originated with J.J. Abrams. It's basically... He described it as because J.J. Abrams sort of, being one of the main forces behind Lost, and many of his things sort of are built on this, which is creating mysteries that are to a large degree the thing that propels the audience forward in terms of leaning forward to see what are the answers to these questions they're posing are going to be. And the reason it's called mystery box storytelling is because as a boy, he was into magic. And there was one particular thing that was a box that would come, and he never opened the mystery box.
The way you just described that feels, I didn't follow it, but it feels like a perfect example of what you're talking about because I'm like, I want to figure out what that story was about, the mystery box story.
I mean, I am sort of a natural mystery box, but usually that's by communicating in an incoherent way. So it accomplishes the same purpose.
Right.
So anyway... That is what I don't know. Is that what you mean by it's?
I guess it is. Yeah. I mean, I was thinking
inherent in the thing.
I was thinking more amnesia kind of things.
Okay.
Like, oh, this is exactly like Overboard with Goldie Hawn, or
classic amnesia.
This is Sliding Doors with Gwyneth Paltrow. No. I don't mean that.
I don't think she has amnesia. Does she have amnesia in that?
The guy has amnesia. I think,
okay.
Right?
It's been
or
a while
something.
Since
I don't know.
I thought she has just two different.
I don't understand how films work.
I would say Memento is more of the. Well, is even that? Yeah, I guess that's kind of amnesia.
But you're right.
No, it's amnesia. It's constant amnesia. That's what that whole thing is.
Never saw it, or did I?
You have? Well, see. All right, now I feel like we should just take a break from our pilots and we should go watch that. Anyway.
But it is. It's like, yes, that's exactly right. I was like, oh, this is a thing where I'm supposed to be 3 steps behind the entire way until they decide to show me their hand.
Right. And as we'll get to Lost, because I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with Lost.
Oh, I have a hate relationship with Lost.
I thought you didn't get that far into Lost.
I didn't.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go. All
yeah.
Right. Well,
but not for any artistic reasons, just because, well, we'll talk about that another time.
Yeah, I look forward to that because it's like Lost is the quintessential mystery box show in that every episode would end with little mystery boxes, or frankly, every act they would try to end with mystery boxes, and they, most of the time, to my thinking, you didn't answer, and the people who love the show would argue that they do answer, and I think what they do is it's a little bit of bait and switch. They answer early on, and then they cease to answer less and less as time goes on, which could be up for debate. But to me it was effective because they were really good at the mysteries. And I have a perspective overall that I get frustrated, but just like there's an aspect that bothers me if you lack a creative morality. And by that, I mean you have a responsibility to your audience of you're hooking them with something.
There has to be a payoff of some sort.
In some way.
Yeah.
And this show is interesting. Here's another sort of thing about how I would like to structure this podcast is trying really as hard as we can to avoid spoilers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which sometimes is going to be difficult to describe, but I don't know how I feel in terms of where they land on paying stuff off or not paying stuff off. At some point, maybe we'll delve further into the show, but I do feel like the tone is so successful that I found myself not being as infuriated as many other shows that I watch where right off the bat, it's clearly like, this is going to be a mystery box show. And it's like, I either don't care or like, the question I always ask about a mystery box show is like in Lost, they would end scenes or sequences where, so you follow someone walking, ominously towards the other person. And then at the end, and they seem like they're really thinking and they're like, what are you thinking? Just like, I'm thinking I'm going to start a war. Boom. And then it was like, if someone came in that moment and sort of leaned into the screen and went, oh, by the way, there's no war. No war is ever going to happen. That's just a thing that he's saying at the end of this episode. Would you still be you're interested if he says, I'm going to start a war. If he said that's never going to be paid off in any way, would you still be interested?
Absolutely not.
Well, that's my feeling. And I think with this show, on a lot of it, I would be like, if they, if there are questions posed and they said, if we don't get to that, or we don't get to that for a long time, or you're going to be not interested in the show. And my feeling for this season, at least, is yes. Mm-hmm. So
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but basically you just said no. But it's
well, you're restating my words. Then I don't think you're putting them in my mouth.
No, I feel like what you're
stealing
saying.
Them. If anything, you're stealing them from my mouth.
I invented the word laughter. I feel like maybe what you're saying, I don't know this, but maybe what you're saying is like the style of it was almost enough for you and the substance wasn't as important.
Well, I guess this is where we get into at what point are the aesthetic decisions that you're making and that the actors are delivering and the visuals are delivering, the music and the texture of the whole thing, at what point is that tied so directly to the show thematically, mm-hmm. and in terms of the subtextual drive of the show, that it's not style over substance, that the style is the substance
yeah.
in a positive way, not
right.
in a negative
right.
way. And that is how I feel about this show.
Uh-huh.
And I would say going further, even more so watching it again now, having seen the whole season. And by that, I don't even, again, necessarily mean, because this and then this. I may mean that or I may not mean that.
So the doctor is the janitor's son.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, well, now you've hit a spoiler.
Damn it.
So anyway,
when you get to the season finale, you won't be surprised.
I feel like I interrupted your flow to go on my mystery box.
That's okay, because I do think that is exactly what I was thinking without knowing that was what I was thinking, was like, because I didn't have the term mystery box, although now that you say that, I have it in my head. I've heard it before.
Amnesia is another subgenre.
I have
mystery
a tattoo.
Box is probably a larger one.
I have a tattoo on my arm that says mystery box, so maybe that's why that's there, is to remind me that it's a... Anyway.
Sean, you're mementoing.
Who knows? I've never seen it. So they start... So she's taking the survey, and just to follow up on your point, she doesn't remember her name. She doesn't know where she's from. And then the next question is, can you name any state or territory in the United States? And she can't. And then she goes, Delaware. And I think that to me is an example of like, I hope that somewhere down the line we understand why she said Delaware. But if we don't, it doesn't really matter.
Right.
It's like it feels like they're setting something up.
Right.
Because it's like, wait, why did she say Delaware? But then if I don't hear about that later on, I won't be like, but I saw her say Delaware at the beginning, and they live in New Jersey. You know what I mean? Like, it was just interesting in and of itself, even if it never makes sense.
Well, there'll be another example of that I guess I'll get to like later on, where it's sort of like, there was a couple of things watching it again now, having seen the first season, where I was like,
they set that up earlier or whatever?
No, the reverse, where I was like, that's not something that came back.
Right.
And then it's like, does that stand on its own? And I can, I don't know if you want me to jump ahead to the example.
Boy,
of that,
we're not following this
really
syllabus
not. Sean
here.
has his acts all broken down.
Go ahead.
The moment when Tremel Tillman, who's amazing in this, who plays Mr. Milchick, he comments, it'd be nice if you said to her, that you like
Your
her
office,
her
yeah.
office, Patricia Arquette's office, and then she's immediately like, ugh, it's horrid. And at first when he says that in the thing, I was like, oh, I don't remember that. Spoiler. I don't remember that coming back. And
Is that a spoiler though? That's like a non-spoiler.
Well, there's a lot of debates.
Don't give away the stuff that doesn't happen.
I always try and err on the side of not saying anything in any direction, because I feel like a lot of people, just to give you my overview on spoilers, most people think they know what a spoiler is. No, I'm not saying anything. I'm just saying at the end, you're gonna feel so sad. I'm like, well, you're not telling me any information, but you're bracing me for a certain state of mind that now I'm not going to feel, because I'm going to have, I'm not along on that emotional journey now.
You're in your head going, Danny said I'm going to feel sad, and I'm eating popcorn. How can I feel sad now?
Oh, Danny Spoiler. He's the worst. I should have known by his last name. Anyway, in that moment, I was like, I don't know if that specifically comes back. And it does feel like it's like, is that of import? However, at the next moment, when she says it was horrid, Milchick makes a face that's kind of like...
he wins?
No, I feel like he made a face like, ugh. And I was like, I am reading into that. Did Milchick set up her new office, or was he somehow responsible for like, we can put her here? Uh-huh. And is that what's going on? Or is it just like I was trying to make her happy, it didn't work?
Right.
Or is it just an indication of control of trying to make... But I feel he looks unhappy. But at first I was like, it was an indication of trying to control Adam Scott's mood somehow.
Or was that the only take they could use, and it was just happened to be while he was breaking up with his girlfriend off set. Look at his facial expression. They're like, this is what we have. We have to use it,
See, Ben Stiller with his level of meticulousness probably would have CG'd a new expression on there if that's how he felt.
Right.
Anyway,
she can't get out of the room. She gets a perfect score. The door opens, and I guess Adam Scott then says something. It says some line. And anyway, the point is, the end of the scene, we still don't know really what's going on.
Yeah, I think he ends with it was a perfect score.
Perfect score, yeah. And I was just like, okay, I would have said it's a mystery box show, but I didn't know that at the time. I was just like, it's one of these shows, okay. And it was interesting enough that I was okay with that,
But you're not... Is there a point when this show was like, you were like, okay, I'm on board with this journey?
Well, here's the thing for me. Yeah. I am not a fan of puzzles. I don't enjoy not knowing things.
Interesting.
So when they start to explain things later on, I'm like, okay, thank you. That's what I wanted to know, But before that...
Hence why you dislike Lost.
No, that's a personal
Separate issue. Okay,
yeah.
Well, we'll get to it.
But I found it compelling.
And get to it, just to be clear, we mean within maybe 100 episodes?
At least 100 episodes, if not 200. So put a pin in this. We'll be back. But yeah, I was like, it's compelling, but I'm not blown away, because I'm not like, this is so cool. I have no idea what's going on. I love it,
Right.
Because I'm just not a huge fan of that kind of thing.
Right. That's fair. And for you, without that, with the questions unanswered, it did not have the effect on you that it had on me, of the tone and the performances being interesting enough.
Well, I mean, performances are different to me than a lot of other things. I was sitting there sort of going, okay, we get it. It's dystopian. There's nobody in the hallways. It's gigantic. It's, I get it. It's 1984. It's whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's how I watch a lot of things, is I just sit there and go, I get it.
Yeah, he's fighting the evil empire. He's going to blow up the Death Star.
Oh, no. He has a lightsaber? Of course he does.
I realized I just spoiled Star Wars. That's the only spoiler I'm going to do.
Just look at the end of the second one. You're going to be sad.
No, Sean.
Not a spoiler.
I might advocate.
So
I
I was enjoying watching it, but it wasn't something where I was like, this is amazing, which is obviously not every show, but what I'm aiming for when I'm watching a show,
Right.
So anyway, cut to a guy in his car crying outside the building, and we see that it's the guy who was asking the questions in the beginning of the episode.
Right. Mark S., played by Adam Scott.
Mm-hmm. And then we have a long sequence where and this is what I'm talking about, where this is all tone, this is all style to me.
Yeah.
Of like walking into this giant building and walking up to the front desk, and then an overhead shot of how vast the front hallway is, and walking through that and going through another hallway and empty offices and lots of space in this giant place. And I think this is where he goes into the locker room and switches the same things for the same things, like takes his watch off and puts on another watch, takes his pass off and puts on another pass.
Right.
And then goes on the elevator.
Yeah.
And hears a bell ring and nods off for a second, I guess. We'll see what happens later.
Don't want to spoil the end of this description of this show.
Yeah. And then comes out as somebody who works in the office there.
Right. And so for you, like to me, and I'm wondering, I might have had the same reaction the first time around. This time I found it really pleasing. Just the design, it's the production designer is Jeremy Hindle, and they were talking about the interior designs is sort of 1967 French film Playtime, and you can really feel that immediately. It also reminded me of Alphaville. That building is the John Deere World Headquarters in Illinois, designed by Eros Saarinen and Kevin Roach from the 1960s.
So they're going for a very specific aesthetic.
A very specific aesthetic that I think that they often in the show also break. And I think you feel it immediately just from like the kind of retro speaker. I love to me, the details of just like that they're static on the speaker. It's like everything's a little wonky, but it's just sort of office-y wonky, like worn down, items. And obviously later we see the monitors and everything are just like, they're also sort of these retro toy kind of computers with the big monitors. So all that stuff, I mean, I love that level of production design and attention to detail.
And I think you're saying that you processed this much more specifically watching it this time than you did the first time?
I knew what they were doing the first time because I love that stuff and I love that kind of, that era of architecture. And so I was drawn immediately. But yes,
I'm a fan of Louis XIV, the Sun King, Versailles.
You've always said that.
Baroque, that kind of thing.
Sean is sitting on a giant garish throne.
Well, it's a toilet, actually.
That's all right.
Yeah.
So yes, I was engaged and aware, and especially in terms of the geometric designs of the shots and the, all that stuff. I really love that stuff. I would say that I was more skeptical on my first viewing, which is maybe where you are, in kind of just like, all right, you're doing similar. You're doing a dystopian, and I love dystopian things. Right. But I was like, all right. We'll see. Well, see.
And for me also, I hate this word, but I will use it anyway. I was clocking all that stuff, but I was more just going, okay, what's going on right now? What is happening? Why are we supposed to be watching this?
Right.
Instead of like, ooh, look at that. That's so cool.
I guess here's my counter thing.
Which is how I watch shows sometimes. With that.
This not be pleasant to watch. I'm glad we watch these things separately. Were you not immediately struck as someone who is, comes from the comedy world as I do, that there was like, that there is a tone, and I consider this heavily Stiller's hand of like, when she throws the speaker at Adam Scott's head, and he's just like, fuck, and it's just kind of, and when he messes up the things, like,
that's after what we've been talking about. But yes, I agree.
After the who are you?
It definitely struck me, but I was also like, I'm still not sure what's happening right now, and it doesn't feel hilarious to me. Like, sure, they're supposed to be following some procedure that he's not exactly following, so Okay, I'm on board with that.
What's kind of fascinating here is you understand that you are, to some degree at this point in the show, a development executive's best example of the kind of note you would hate, which is they can't have them not know what's going on.
No, I'm not saying I hated not knowing what's going on. I'm saying that was what I was compelled by.
Oh, you were compelled by it.
Yeah. And so I wasn't really paying attention as much to everything else as much as I was like, I want to know what's happening next.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right. So in some ways it's serving its purpose, even though I'm looking at sort of the larger picture, particularly in the second viewing.
That's what I was trying to get at is It's easier the second time you watch it to not be so focused on what am I seeing right now and just focus on what you're seeing right now.
Yeah.
I guess that doesn't, well.
What you're seeing right now.
Versus what you're seeing right now. You know what I mean? So I'm still like, okay, offices are weird and boring and corporate jobs suck and I get it and whatever, but I'm still like, okay, what's happening right now? You know, he goes in and he sits down. Doesn't he start playing a video game on his computer? He's playing some kind of weird.
Is he?
I think he is. And then he gets called out to go do his interview. And that's where we start to go, oh, okay. So he's the guy that we've been watching this whole time who doesn't quite understand what he's going to do because it's his first day on the job or whatever.
Right. Which is, I mean, it's obviously been done across film history, but one of the most well-known practitioners is Tarantino-esque of jumping back and then seeing the same scene from a different angle.
Right. Which was interesting. I enjoyed that. Didn't care for all the architectural stuff. Mm-hmm. But, you know.
I loved it. It's really interesting how much it hit me this time around.
I guess we're skipping around a bit because we also didn't talk about the meeting in the office where he goes to see the boss.
Right.
And that's where you were talking about Milchek saying, tell her the office is great.
Now, to me, this again, in terms of design and also in terms of the satire, it's like a great dystopia joke to me when she's like, turn in your card. He puts his card down and she gives him exactly the same, identical looking card. But what's interesting, it's to kind of throw forward to the end. And these are the kind of details that I love this level of layering as long as these are the kind of thing that I would say I would love it if it paid off, but I wouldn't be bothered if it didn't I don't know if you noticed at the end when he goes to his locker and he takes off the card, he looks at it.
Yeah.
Like it's something's different about the card.
Something weird, yeah.
Like the weight different? What's different? It's really interesting.
Mm-hmm. So he meets with the boss who I think that's where the board is supposed to be there, right?
Yes.
And they don't contribute vocally.
The board will not be contributing vocally.
It's just static on the radio.
Yeah.
And he gets promoted. See, again, these are, I don't know that I really am on board with this kind of thing as jokes. Like
this kind of thing is an amnesia show. Is that what you mean?
No. Like they make him the macro data refinement department chief, you know? And I'm like, okay, that's a title that means nothing.
Right.
And that's the joke of it.
Right.
But it's not like, oh, that is hilarious. You know what I mean?
So as someone, I've written a lot of things that are this kind of satire of corporate culture. So for you, the idea that they're obviously playing on the nonsense titles and departments of a inhumane large corporate behemoth. Do you feel like it's tropey? Do you feel like it's...
I guess I do. I feel like we've seen that before, you know? And so it wasn't, which is fine. I mean, that's the nature of a lot of stuff, but I was more interested in what was actually going on.
Yeah.
As opposed to please spend more time setting up the fallacies of corporate culture. You know?
Right.
Because I already know that, even though I've never worked in that kind of environment.
It's very interesting having this conversation from this perspective because I think that I have a similar way of watching something, which is if I get hitched on something where I'm like, all right, but you better pay off this, or all right, but this thing is bothering me, I'll go along for the ride. Right. Whereas to me, the tone of menace that sort of permeates everything, and it's just such a to me, an astonishing level of control in the design and the sets and the stark white hallways and the way that Stiller shoots the traveling shots through the hallways and, the upbeat 60s music that's somehow even more upsetting. Mm-hmm. And just like the choices of like when Milchek comes in and Tramel Tillman as Mr. Milchek is just like, he just becomes more and more of a revelation as the show goes on in terms of, spoiler, he's good in the show. But you could argue that that's a spoiler because then I'm saying, oh, well, he's becomes a major character.
Yeah,
he's important. So I apologize.
He wasn't that important in the pilot, but just wait until he's the king of the world.
Oh, Sean! But they call him Mr. Milchek. They're calling each other by their sort of, there's a deference to him as an authority that to me is immediately sort of ominous that there's this hierarchical thing that's very subtle. So to me, I was impressed that there was this nuanced hand of basically telling us a lot of things without giving us any information. Mm-hmm. Sean obviously has a contrary perspective on this.
No, I don't really disagree with that, but it took a while, it felt like, to get beyond this is the world we're in. And I don't know that I needed to be spending that much time figuring that out.
So all of the moments that to me are these great tone setters, like the long walks through the hallways, you're just like, let's cut to the chase.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I've been in a hallway. I know what it's like.
How do that kind of hallway?
Well, it was more of a corridor. So he's going to do this interview. And as they're discussing that he's going to do this interview, the door starts to get jiggled from the other side because the woman is trying to get out of the room.
Right. This is Britt Lauer as Helly.
And we cut back to the office. Milchek wants to help out because it's not going well. Mm-hmm. And the boss won't let him be involved.
Right.
And then we come back and Adam Scott's character is in talking to the woman. And this was my favorite moment of the whole pilot is when she says, "Am I livestock?" Like, that was where her brain went in terms of like what was going on, which I thought was I did think that was so funny.
Yeah.
Because it makes sense that somebody would be like, I can't remember anything. I don't have a purpose. I'm in a weird, have I been grown as food?
Yeah. And put into a nice dress.
Right.
Such a funny.
Yeah. Like her detective brain is working overtime and she's like, I know what it is. I'm livestock.
But after having, found the reveal in the pilot of the concept of severance, do you not feel like it's sort of interesting that's like stripped of information about the situation? Theoretically, you don't have the specifics of your identity, but you still have your identity, which is an interesting way to handle the sci-fi pretense. Do you find it interesting from that perspective? It's just like, that's what she would think. That's who that person, that's what that person.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know enough about, I don't know enough about that. It just made sense to me that somebody like thinking too hard about that situation would think of that as a possibility fairly quickly, and it's so absurd at the same time that it was really funny to me.
Yeah.
And then he explains all the stuff that they're going to do and how they're being watched by the bosses and the concept of severance gets explained and all that stuff.
Right. And did you know at that point?
Did I know what?
Did you know what the overall concept of the show was?
No, I knew nothing going into watching this.
Is perfect. And so when she's
I had not even read an article about it, read a review, nothing.
And so when she's running through the door, and just immediately comes back, did you have a theory on what was going on?
I thought they were screwing up because the set was wrong.
And Stiller, somehow this got all the way through the editing process. Oh my God, we forgot to cut this.
No, by that time I was like, okay, this is some kind of weird sci-fi thing and there's some kind of brain thing going on. I mean, because the moment he's in the elevator on the way down and the bell rings and he just shuts his eyes and then wakes up again, I'm like, okay, there's some kind of mind control thing or somehow they're making people believe something that isn't true.
Yeah.
I didn't know what it was, but I was like, I get it. I get it.
It's really your catchphrase.
No, I was on board with it, but I was like, okay, I kind of understand. So when she kept coming back.
I understand isn't as catchy as I get it.
I kind of understand.
It's much less definitive.
Maybe. But when she kept coming back in, I was like, okay, so she can't get out. Like
Right.
there's whatever's going on with their brains, they're not allowed to leave,
Right.
even when they say they want to.
Right.
And so to go back to the first scene, even though his character like screwed up the survey or whatever, was like, let me start over, they just knew they were perfectly in control the entire time.
Right.
There was just no chance that anybody would screw things up, which is also interesting because then when she was jiggling the door handle,
Right.
they were sort of panicking, going like, what if she gets in here?
Right.
You know? So it almost is contradictory of like, we're in control. We know exactly what's going on the whole time, but something weird could happen.
Right.
You know?
Right.
Which is, I guess, good for dramatic tension. So she can't get out. She keeps seeing this stairwell in the distance, and then every time she opens the door, she's back where she started from.
Right. And are you satisfied by that?
Yes.
Well, I just don't know why I don't know why you gave this Rotten Tomato score on this.
I just love giving so many Rotten Tomatoes. No, I'm saying...
I mean, in the moment is, I guess, what I'm asking.
Yeah.
You are like, oh, interesting. Or are you more like, I get it?
I kind of was.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, okay, like... And to me, that moment is a little bit, I don't know what I would call it, like bait and switch. Like, we know she's not leaving because why did they set up that whole set in the first place? And why was she the character they started on? I mean, what happens? She goes and walks up the stairs and Adam Scott's character goes back in the office and they're like, hey, she's gone. Let's
That would be a fantastic reveal.
You guys know it's Phil's birthday, right? We got him a cake, so will you just sign the card?
While I agree with you,
Yeah.
isn't there an element? It's what we might call schmuck bait in the industry, which is,
I mean, shine a light on it.
it's they're presenting is this going to happen? Or we as the writers are presenting that when it's like, well, we know this isn't going to happen.
Right.
So yes, I agree with that. But at the same
So
time,
I'm learning new things all the time, like mystery box, schmuck bait.
have you never heard schmuck bait?
I have. Again, it's not something I talk about all the time, so
Yeah.
I just forgot that was what it was called. But yeah, I say bait and switch.
It's much less Jewish.
Yeah.
Bait
and switch.
Oh, now you've Jewished it up. So even though I agree that it's that, isn't the moment? It's like, to me, it's okay if you're doing a bait and switch as long as there's an interesting sort of reveal attached to it. So the way
Right.
that they handle this reveal of like, yes, she's obviously, the show's not going to be over now. So how are they going to handle it? To me, it's a clever way that they sort of handle it and shoot it.
Well, and yes.
Like
right.
with the
way it
point
was
of view shot
was-
of
right.
going through and then suddenly.
But also, I think what makes it important and not just mensch. Did you say mensch bait or
Schmuck bait?
kerfuffle bait?
I guess it could be mensch bait, but
Depends on what you think of the person.
yeah, he might. If the mensch is also a schmuck, which I guess could happen.
It's establishing the rules of the world. It's going like, this is a place that people just can't leave, and we're seeing a specific example of that, which I
Right.
do think is important because it is a weird world, getting weirder by the second as we start to understand what's going on.
Right.
And it needs to be justified in some way. And even though that's a crazy justification, it makes the fact that everybody is stuck there make sense as opposed to rebelling the entire time.
The justification. How are you seeing the justification? How would you describe
That
it?
people are not allowed to leave.
They just
even
can't
if you,
leave.
Even if you
Gotcha.
try to leave, you end
Yeah.
up back where you started.
Right.
So at a certain point, you have to stop expelling that energy and go, what can I do in this situation?
Right.
I need to surrender myself. So they give her the video of herself explaining what's going on.
Right.
And so we learn that this procedure separates people's work lives from their home lives.
Right.
And they don't know about the other part of their life.
Right. And the real is sort of Helly Britlauer talking to herself and saying, I've undergone this procedure. It's indicating that she has basically made this decision about doing this.
She's okay with it.
Right.
Which I think is another part of like building the world, because it means that it's their choice to be there. They're not slaves or captive or anything like that.
Right. Which to me is, maybe this, I'm seeing it from my own particular slant because of my personal issues, but to me, I like this as a theme of our greatest enemies being ourselves, to the degree that we will even entrap ourselves in a life, that we could get out of.
Right.
Or choices or whatever it is.
Then they get out of work, and we see that they don't know each other all of a sudden.
Right.
He almost hits her with his car. She yells at him.
Yeah.
They don't know each other. And now we get to see his home life a little bit.
Right.
Pretty bleak. Pretty bleak.
Yes. I wanted to ask you, because I believe they shot it in Jersey. I could be wrong about that. But so it's all sort of, East Coast kind of cold.
I didn't even catch that.
I just wanted to ask you at this point.
Yeah.
In terms of the climate, which is sort of unusual, I think, for television, because it's usually aspirational and it's a great, location, or it's just intentionally like freezing, terrible, like survival situation. This seemed unusual to me because it had a flavor of like, we both grew up in, I grew up in Greenwich Village. Sean grew up in Yonkers? What is it?
Jesus Christ.
I don't know,
New Rochelle.
New Rochelle. All right. Well, whatever it is.
Queen City of the Sound, only 45 minutes from Broadway.
But we're both familiar with that. And I went to school upstate New York. So it's like we both familiar with this, cold, dour, a snow-filled kind of, but not overwhelming. Like it's livable, but it's just sort of can be depressing sometimes and whatever. And to me, they captured that.
It was very bleak
in this way that I don't think I've seen on TV before.
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I was thinking of, because I did not peg it for the East Coast.
Yeah.
I was thinking more like Midwest. Like I could have seen it be
I think
like
that is
Fargo
what they're going
or something
for.
like that,
Yes. I know that Mark's house is in Nyack, New York, and I think that the outside of the factory is in Jersey, but it's Bell Labs in Jersey, but yeah, I think that is probably what they're going for. And there's also the houses that are all identical.
That was crazy to me. Like the exact same townhouses, the whole development that he lives in.
But don't you feel like you've seen things like that?
Oh, absolutely.
Driven by them?
Yeah,
and they always
absolutely.
creep me the crap out. And it's like, I'm sure they're good deals and they're probably comfortable inside.
Oh, they're great.
But
they're like a palace inside.
But they
Louis XIV.
Oh, Jesus. But they weird me out.
Yeah, it's very bizarre because...
So it's perfect for this show.
Think about the fact that when you first move in there, I feel like when you drive home from somewhere, there's certain landscape perspectives you have, and you're like, my house is the one right after this thing.
Yeah.
But if every house is the same, it just feels like you're like, where am I going right now? I'm lost,
Yeah.
I mean, somebody could have not ever gotten home after they left one time. In a place like that.
That's our show.
But
what? Yeah, I get it. He can't find his house. But where's this going?
So he's at home. He doesn't really have much of a life. He's like watching TV in front of his aquarium, drinking a beer, I think, or a wine, or maybe it was a malt liquor of some sort. I'm not sure.
What are the other possibilities, Sean?
Whiskey. Long Island iced tea, which would have screwed up the geography of the whole thing.
Probably not a pina colada.
No. Not a pina colada. And again, it's like establishing how boring everything is because he has a weird problem with his neighbor and the trash and the recycling, and he can't explain it, and she doesn't understand it, and we never see her. We just hear her voice on the phone.
Right.
And it's the kind of thing where you see somebody as a homeowner going, oh my God, can you believe it? She's always putting her trash in the spot that my trash is supposed to go, which means tomorrow my trash is still going to be here when it was supposed to be taken away. And I'm never going to. So next week I'll have two trashes and meanwhile you're like, this is the most boring story I've ever heard,
And are you disconnecting or are you sort of
No, I'm again, it's world building. I'm like, yes. Right. His office is boring. His life is boring. Everything is so boring. Hard to make that compelling, and yet I found it compelling to watch.
Right. But did you see the distinction of like at work he seems to be upbeat and his home life, which granted is equally sort of mundane. I mean, is like filled with this depressive.
Right. There's sadness there.
Yeah, right.
Even before we find out why, we know that he's sad.
Yeah.
which like I fucking need to be watching that show.
Right. That you really say, I get it.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. I get it.
It's a different tone. Get it.
So his
get it.
sister comes over to say that he has forgotten about the fact that he's supposed to come over for. I got a little lost in this because it was like, we're not having dinner or something like that. I don't totally understand what was going on.
Right.
But this is the sort of exposition scene where we find out a lot of stuff about what's going on. He meets with his brother-in-law and his sister and a couple of other people, and everybody has questions, and somebody finds out for the first time that he's had this famous severance procedure, and we just get a lot of information about what's going on.
And at what point, I'm forgetting, do you find out about the sort of bad things that have happened in his life?
I think it's in that scene.
Okay.
That they talk about his late wife.
Right.
And all of a sudden you're like, I see why this guy's so sad.
Right.
His wife is late to everything.
No, Sean, no, you've got the wrong interpretation.
But it gives him a big reason to be sad, you know? And then it sort of is implied or maybe even said out loud that the reason he had this procedure was so that he could spend time every day not thinking about his dead wife.
Right. Now there's an actor in there.
Yes, I thought of that too.
A show that Sean and I both are obsessed with.
We'll get to that one as well.
All right.
No, the guy from Patriot.
Michael Chernus.
Uh-huh.
And I'm curious what it's obviously another, a fantastic performance by Michael Chernus, can do no wrong. But this was a character that kind of did bump me.
This was the brother-in-law.
The brother-in-law.
Yeah.
Who's married to his sister. That's what a brother-in-law is. His pregnant sister in the show. And so that game, as we say in improv parlance, of they're not having dinner because he's making a point about how food, is really what we should. It's more about connecting and all this stuff. How did you feel?
I didn't totally follow it, and I was like, I'm not sure what they're trying to do.
And
here.
was your thought, you say you don't follow it, you feel like this does tie to what's off in this world?
That's what I thought, but I didn't quite see how.
And to me, this is sort of the problem with this particular aspect, and I think it's one of the few, for me, missteps of this pilot is there's an element, we've already hit, again, in improv parlance, the first unusual thing. Mm-hmm. We'll sort of give you a little bit of slack to figure out what's going on and not ask too many questions and whatever. And so then if you're adding another thing in the outside world, it's like, does that connect to the inside world? And that's where I was kind of and also, that character, while he's playing it in a very funny way and he does a lot of funny things, it's like we're not sure, are we supposed to be looking at him as like, oh, he's another weird thing in this world, right, and it's somehow connected? Because everything grows out of the main pretense of severance. To me, all the weirdness to a large degree grows out of that, and the design and the weird separated. Because once you go back to the normal world, it seems like he has an iPhone, and that was an element that was a big thing for me of like the details.
It was a Galaxy.
Was it a Galaxy? I think it was an iPhone.
Probably an iPhone. It's an Apple show.
Remember that? Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's definitely an iPhone. No question. So it's like, I guess we're in, if not our world, you're sort of one step away from our world. Right. So then his thing is like, you could definitely say, oh, yeah, there are people who are thinking a woo-woo kind of a self-congratulatory fashion like this guy does in the real world. But that is something that bumped me when I watched it.
Yeah, it was like, how does this connect to everything we've seen so far? Is it supposed to be, and I still don't quite have an answer to this, but is it supposed to be that there's a shortage of food now or any, I was trying to understand it, and I think I just didn't totally.
But they do eventually say, and they do make clear that it's like, this is this guy's statement that he's making.
I guess they made it clear. Maybe I just didn't pay attention closely enough.
I guess it's open into interpretation. I feel like, to me, it was clear that it was his, I don't know if you'd say, sort of self-congratulatory, big statement he's making to have a dinner that has no food so that he can kind of, basically they can all blather on and congratulate themselves on how important this is. But I don't think that it's supposed to connect to
Right. It was also weird that his name was Rickon, which is one of the kids in Game of Thrones.
Oh, interesting. That I didn't even spot that connection. But to me, it's sort of like that is another thing of like, oh, he has a weird name. He's a weird guy. Right. He's sort of self-congratulatory. The other thing that was a big thing, I'm trying to remember if it's even resolved, and I guess it's better if I don't say, why the sister, who seems so cool and chill,
is with that guy.
Is with this guy who's such an ass.
Right.
And they're playing him for laughs in almost more of a broad sketch way. I would say that the other, even though he's playing it very well.
The 2 times he came in with a wig on, it was very strange.
And when he came in dressed as a banana, I was like, well, I don't know. Is this part of the Severance concept, or is this? That being said, I'm curious what your take is on the side guests at that dinner.
I don't really have a take. I felt like they were there just to...
You gotta have a take, Sean.
It was it was funny. Like, one of them I felt like was just wide-eyed and nodding the entire time, just agreeing with everything.
I looked at her up, and her name's Grace Rex, and I was sure I knew her from something.
I felt the same way. She just has a very appealing face.
Know her from somewhere?
I don't know.
Who knows? But whatever the case, I thought she was great.
Yeah.
And I wonder how much, if there was any improvisation. Because there's moments, and Zach Cherry is one of the main people in the office who is from definitely the improv world in New York, who's like, the actor that's sort of full of complaints, and he's trying to get the waffle perk. There's a rhythm that certain actors that come from improv have, like a naturalness that is just when the director lets them kind of go, and like he's fantastic. Zach Cherry is, and even though this Grace Rex is just sort of a moment in it, it's just like she has like a moment. I think that's off screen. She's off camera. She says, like, when they're talking about literature, and she goes, "I love literature." It's such a great side joke.
Yeah. 2 other things I thought were interesting in that whole sequence. One is that we find out that he used to be a history professor.
Right.
Which I thought just thematically was interesting to me, like the fact that their memories are being wiped and there's no... And then the other thing I thought was interesting was, and again, this did feel a little sketch-like to me, but when they go into the bedroom and there's 3 beds for the baby that hasn't even been born yet, because the baby doesn't want to change, like, let the baby change beds on its own, which again to me is like the evolution of a life cycle and like remembering where you came from and where you are and where you're going versus what they're doing with the Severance thing, where they have no idea where, what happens when they're in one place and what happens when they're in the other place.
And are you saying you like that because it ties in thematically, or you dislike it because it's heavy-handed, or?
I guess I'm saying I did like that it tied in thematically. I didn't like it because it was heavy-handed.
Oh, there you go.
No, I thought it worked, but it did feel a little silly with the beds.
That whole strain is something that kind of bugs me. A thing that I did like is that they offhandedly, I don't know that I noticed it this much in the initial viewing, they offhandedly refer to Lumen, the company that Adam Scott works for, began in the 1800s making topical salves. Yeah. So... Right. We find out that one person thinks it's a tech company, one person thinks it's a medical company. Right. Which is another classic dystopian sort of.
It's just they're in charge of everything. They're a giant corporation that does whatever they want,
But the reason I like it so much is that I think it's kind of in the pilot a little bit already in little details, but in the 1800s they were selling topical salves. So snake oil is basically, and just sort of starts this aesthetic, say, so you start to see a little later that's kind of like not literally, but sort of in the design of the Lumen world of like traveling huckster carts in the Old West kind of thing. That's like, to me, really interesting and a nice weaving in of that aesthetic.
Right. Then we see him in bed at night. He's in one of the beds. I forget if he's in the race car bed or the helicopter bed or the...
I think it's just one race car bed.
Tugboat bed. And he sees somebody on outside in the woods.
Right.
Very strange. He's not quite sure what he's seeing. Is he hallucinating? Is there a person out there? He doesn't know.
Right. And then that guy goes out to take a look, No, he goes out into the woods.
Yeah.
And the figure, there's like headlights on Adam Scott's face, and so he just looks away for a second and he disappears. And we of course know that the only person that could be when you look away and they're gone is Batman. So that's who we assume that this is.
Right. And
Spoiler
we have not
alert.
even seen the bat signal yet.
No.
So
And that to me, then I was excited because I was like, oh, great, this is going to be a Batman show. It's sort of a backdoor sort of Batman
But
concept.
which Batman? That was my question. Which is Keaton back?
Right. Is it going to be Affleck? What are
Yeah.
they, how are they playing
Pattinson.
this? Yeah.
Adam West. That would have been difficult, but you could do it digitally. With Stiller's attention to detail.
That's true. Just a fully CG Adam West in the middle of this.
It's called Lumen, Robin.
Good Adam West.
Right. So then this is where we see the full house development after this. He's again, very boring, like cleaning the gutters on his house. And then he goes to, he gets a gift card earlier because of the injury he receives. He has a gift card to Pips.
Right.
And he goes to Pips to get some food. And that's when the guy shows up and the mystery box continues.
Well, there the mystery box kind of pays off because they'd referred to throughout the show
His best friend
Petey, and Petey being gone. And it kind of makes sense that he would be as upset as he is because the way it's presented in the show is basically like this is their life. Like you imagine, it really does feel like it would be hell. Of like you leave work and you are immediately back at work. There is no moment where you are not at work.
Right.
So if that is the case and your best friend is the one shining light there, that would destroy you.
Yeah.
He actually takes it, even though he's clearly emotionally affected, he takes it much better than I would take it.
So this guy has information that he's saying, if you want to know what's really going on, basically is you have to go to this place or whatever. I didn't totally follow it, but basically there's something weird going on with the Severance stuff.
Yeah, and I don't think you're supposed to understand
Right.
that much more. The things that are interesting to me about it is they're doing the things, again, as Sean would say, like you've seen in these other things like it, where it's like, oh, the guy comes in and you're whatever. And what I like about it is, and I feel like...
It's like Gene Hackman in Conspiracy Theory.
That's right. It's funny you should... Wait, I think I'm thinking of something else. You thinking about Enemy of the State?
Maybe Enemy of the State, yes.
Right,
sorry.
right.
Conspiracy Theory was Mel Gibson.
Conspiracy Theory was Mel Gibson.
Enemy of the State was Will Smith.
Will Smith. And what I
Gene
loved about
Hackman.
Enemy of the State, as I was thinking about this recently, I was like, should I go back and watch Enemy of the State? Which I don't know is that good a movie, but Gene Hackman is playing himself in the conversation.
Uh-huh.
With like they just like we're like let's just make it the same character. Obviously, he's in a cage where he's listening to everything. He's got all this tech. It's obviously his character from the conversation, but they're not paying any rights because they don't name him by name.
Right.
They just cast the same guy, and I'm like, that's fine. I'll watch a fucking sequel of that fucking whack job.
Right.
So I love that. But another thing to just tie it into what we're talking about is this. There's a real sort of feeling and vibe of 70s conspiracy thrillers like that, like Seconds with Rock Hudson, like the Parallax View, which even has a lot of the symmetrical designs. It's just really, it has that vibe, and to me in an effective way. But the thing I was going to say was, in that scene, you're leaning on it in this kind of ominous, heavy-handed way, but then there are like, Adam Scott calls it out immediately. Oh, what are you gonna tell me that you're in danger because they're chasing because you've got these? And he's like, yes, I am gonna tell you that. So they call it out, but they also have moments that are of comedy where he says like, so what? We were like friends. He goes,
you're my best friend.
I'm your best friend,
and you're my very good friend.
Yeah. It's just like it ends on a funny,
Yeah.
like, oh, A, that's funny. B, that is the kind of guy that the Adam Scott that we've seen in the real world, and frankly, the one in the Severed, would be friends with.
Right.
So it serves both purposes.
Yeah. And then we have another big mystery box reveal, which is that the person who's getting the trash all confused and the recycling all confused is the boss from work. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure about this, but it seemed to me that
she was playing actually Patricia Arquette in a meta turn
She was playing Patricia Arquette from True Romance.
That's right.
Yeah.
And that's why she was wearing the leopard outfit.
My name is Alabama.
You start to hear the little tinkly music in the background from Badlands.
Right. No, that she was not severed. Like, in other words, she's aware of what's going on.
Right.
I don't know if that tracks with the fact that she can't figure out how the recycling works.
That's a huge plot line. Really, that is. This is a spoiler. It is all about the recycling. That is what the spine of this whole.
But so she is clearly keeping an eye on him for some reason that we don't really know.
Yeah. And did you read that from the what? Like what communicated?
I don't know. Just like the way because doesn't she say like you're a good person or something like
you're
that?
A good man.
Yeah, and it just felt like she was supposed to be aware of what was going on with herself in the office.
I think you're right, and I have to me it was the look. But the thing that is interesting about that to me is that however it plays out, whether that's true or it's not true, they lean into it in a way that is like that is a sure hand on that moment to communicate information. And I think they really do the exposition, which is especially hard in a show where you're trying to keep so many things secret, is really well handled to me in this show. And another example of that is like earlier when his sister says to him, and we don't know she's a sister at this moment, hey, you got to come to dinner. You owe me this. And he's like, why do I owe you this? He goes, remember that time when we were kids and I was just generally a way better sibling than you. Like that's a joke. It's true to it really tells us more about their interaction as siblings than it does that they're siblings.
Right.
And that's just really a nice light touch on the exposition, which is very difficult to do.
I always talk about that in terms of pilot exposition related to early improv class scenes.
Yeah.
Where students first figure out that they're supposed to know each other and how they know each other and what their relationship is. So they start doing a lot of scenes where they're like, but Andy, you're my best friend and we live in the garage behind the, and it's just all exposition.
Right.
And that's one of the hardest things about pilots is because we don't know anything about any of these people. So how do you get that information out the first time you see them?
Right.
Because it is important for us to know how they know each other.
Right. Because if you don't do that, then Sean would be in the audience going like, how do you know each other? I'm confused.
Also, we get it. We get it.
Well, actually, I don't get it.
We don't get it.
Well, now I get it. You said you were. It's interesting because now that I'm looking back on it, I think that maybe I was closer to the reaction you're describing the first time. Although I think I appreciated it more just from a design standpoint because I loved sort of just the visuals and all that. And I love that kind of world building because there's so much, to me, effective world building. But I would love to watch more of this with you. And that's why this is now a Severance podcast. Every week.
I would like to watch the rest of the show just because I did enjoy it. I do want to see where it goes. And I've heard from so many people that like, if you just stick with it, the last episode is amazing.
Oh, I don't know if I would put that kind of pressure on all of it, but I want to hear you just go blow by blow on, but it is, it's funny when people say that to you about a show.
Yeah. I'm like, why do I have to wait that long?
To me, that's a perfect example of a spoiler.
Yeah, that's true. Sorry, I take it back.
I don't know. I don't know if I would even.
I spoiled it without ever even seeing the show.
I would say just watch the show and enjoy the show.
And so you're saying also that it benefited from repeated viewings. So it's sort of similar to like the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
It's interesting. Do you think it's a better show? Maybe this isn't something you can answer because it's just all perspective. You think it's a better show overall if when you go back to the first episode, you're like, I'm really enjoying this even more because now I have the benefit of really being in the vibe and understanding stuff and whatever? Or do you think it's better if it's just like immediately like, it's got me, I'm in?
I feel like the second one is better, but I feel like there's two ways to go with the first example where there's shows that I really didn't like the first time I watched them. And then I watched them again and I was like, oh, okay, now I'm more on board. And there's other shows where I watched them a second time and they were just there was so much more going on that I didn't even realize the first time.
Because I think a lot of shows, and I actually think some of our favorites, The Wire and Deadwood, are perfect examples. As we'll probably talk about this quite a bit, that there's a certain phenomena that I think is a generally accepted upon thing that's like the fourth episode sort of, I don't know if we call it syndrome or just phenomena, where it's like first three episodes you're like, all right, what are we doing? And by the fourth episode, this is definitely my experience of The Wire, and I think maybe Deadwood's a little muddier, I was like, I'm in. And to a certain degree, I wonder if that is what was in those first three episodes. And from another perspective, I wonder if it's just the show is training you how to watch the show, like what the rhythm of it's going to be, what to expect.
And I know, just to make this clear point, because we are going to come back to it again and again, that is not how I felt about The Wire. Like, we've had this discussion before where you're like, I was not on board till the fourth episode, and I'm like, the first scene of the first episode blew my mind.
Right.
And I was like, this is a show I want to watch. You know?
Right.
But
you got to remember, you didn't have the show recommended to you by Sean Conroy. I was like,
right.
I'm going to defy Sean. I do not need to watch this show. If he likes it, clearly something's wrong.
Seems like it must be garbage.
Okay, thank you for joining us. If you liked this episode where we talked about Severance, we have already, this is how fast we work, we've already recorded episode 2, our coverage of episode 2 of Severance on our Patreon, which is www.patreon.com/copilotstv. No hyphen.
There is not a hyphen, and nor is there the words no hyphen.
That's right. Although, buy one of our no hyphen t-shirts. We'll have that up soon. Anyway, support the Patreon. Even if you don't, you can join, for free to be alerted about what's up there at Copilots TV. We got a lot of other stuff there. We got Spartacus episode 2. We got a Mike Mitchell bonus content interview. Our producer, Kevin, also has let us know that we actually do have a tip line.
We really do have a tip line.
All of our joking about a tip line.
Let me ask you this, Andy. What kind of tips do you think people like? What kind of tips do you want? Do you want people to call in and be like, "Rusty nail in the fourth race"? Like, what kind of?
I mean, I would love a few. I would love a few OTB suggestions. I need it. But obviously, call in, comment, a question, anything you want. One thing that we'd be very excited about is if you have any insider information about questions that Sean or I have brought up. Probably me. I'm the big question asker. But any of us, or you have any kind of perspective on anything, feel free. Send it in. Give us a voicemail.
Call it in. Don't send it. Call it.
Or, send us an email. All the information is on the Patreon page.
Are we going to play people's voicemails?
I don't know. Maybe at the end. We'll see. If not, we probably will have a mailbag episode, I'm guessing.
If we're going to play the voicemails out loud, I have to get a voice modulator.
So that you can send in your own. You can send in your
Please
own
don't say that.
voicemail. Send it into 802 Copilot, which is somehow Kevin got a hold of it. Which is 802-267-4562. Say anything you want. Leave any tip you want. Lastly, if you like our show, it helps us out a lot if you leave 5 stars on iTunes or Spotify. And not only that, but you get your pilot's wings. Not a real thing. It's just, we're just saying you got your pilot's wings.
There's a lot of people out there with pilot's wings who don't actually have pilot's wings since they're not real.
How many?
I know there's at least 50.
Whoa. Join the exclusive club.
So that's it. That's the end of the show. We'll see you next time on whatever we decide to call this show.
Andrew Secunda's Co-Pilots with Sean Conroy.
I'm okay with that.